Hello, my name is Dhruva Jaishankar. I'm Executive Director of ORF America. One of the most important vectors of India's international engagement has been the diaspora, and this is manifest in a diverse range of fields, from the economy to people-to-people connects, to the arts, to sports, but increasingly also in politics and in public life. And you see this now reflected in the growing profile of the Indian diaspora in places largely in the Anglophone world, places like the United States, UK, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, but also places where there's a very large historical Indian diaspora, countries like Guyana, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, Mauritius, Fiji, but also in some unlikely places, places like Portugal and Ireland, both of which elected heads of government of Indian origin in recent years. But to discuss the growing role of the Indian diaspora in politics and in public life, we have a conversation led by Sanjeev Joshipura of Indiaspora, with two esteemed legislative officials, one each from the US and the UK. Raja Krishnamoorthi, who is a Democratic congressman from Illinois, and Lord Popat, who is a life peer in the House of Lords in the United Kingdom. And in their conversation, they discuss a wide range of issues, from the growing participation of Indians in the politics of their countries to generational change, to such topics as their relationship with Barack Obama and Test cricket, amongst other topics and issues. So, without further ado, over to Sanjeev Joshipura for a conversation on the role of the Indian diaspora in politics and in public life.
I'd like to thank ORF and ORF America for inviting Indiaspora to be a part of Raisina at DC. We have a very esteemed guest today, Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi of Illinois, and I'll get to introducing him in just a second. But before I do that, allow me to introduce Indiaspora. We are a nonprofit organization founded in 2012 by a successful investor and entrepreneur in San Francisco named M.R. Rangaswamy. And our overall mission is to position the global Indian diaspora as a force for good and as a bridge to India. In the 1950s and 60s, there was a lone congressman of Indian descent, Dilip Singh Sound, who got elected to the US Congress. But after that, there was a significant hiatus in terms of time before other people of Indian origin were elected to the US Congress. Now I'm proud to say that we have four congressmen, congresswomen who are part of the US House of Representatives. Obviously, Raja Krishnamoorthi is one of them. And we also have in Kamala Harris, we have a vice president who is also of Indian descent. In addition to that, I should mention that this is a bipartisan phenomenon. At Indiaspora, we do our work in a nonpartisan way, and we have found that there is a lot of interest in both major political parties in America, Republicans and Democrats. In fact, there have been a couple of Republican governors of states in America who are very high-profile people of Indian origin. And today we'll get into this a little bit more with the congressman. But now we are in a situation where, in addition to elected officials, we have a lot of senior-level political appointees who are also of Indian descent. And that, in fact, has only increased over time, from the George W. Bush administration to Barack Obama's, to Donald Trump's, and now to Joe Biden's, where there are now over 60 people of Indian origin in the Biden-Harris administration. Let me now quickly introduce our esteemed guest of honor today, Raja Krishnamoorthi. So the congressman is a three-term elected official from Illinois. He's an entrepreneur turned politician and has a very interesting background. And currently he serves on the Committee of Intelligence in the House of Representatives, as well as on the Committee of Oversight and Government Reform. So two very important committees, but also most recently, he has been part of the subcommittee on the coronavirus crisis in the US House. Really, my first question is about your own journey. If you could tell us a little bit more about your advancement in on the American political stage, and sort of put that in the context of the rise of Indian American politicians.
Well, thank you so much. My advancement or my rise starts with my origin story. I was actually born in India. I came to this country when I was 3 months old. My father was studying engineering in Buffalo, New York. And things were going really well until suddenly they did not. and we hit the economic skids as a family in the recession of 1973. But thanks to the generosity of the American government, we were allowed to stay until my father could complete his studies and then find an excellent job teaching engineering in Peoria, Illinois. And so then we loaded up the U-Haul truck and started driving until we reached Peoria. But in Peoria, that's where my parents educated their two sons in excellent public schools. They bought their first proper home, and that's where they entered the middle class. And every night at the dinner table, my father would say something along the lines of, think of the greatness of this country. And whatever the two of you do, my brother and me, just make sure this country is there for the next families who need it. And so that became the North Star of my personal compass. Fast forward, I ended up going to college and law school, coming back to Chicago, becoming a partner at a place called Kirkland & Ellis, but then went into government. I became deputy state treasurer. I helped to start the anti-corruption unit of the Illinois Attorney General's office. I went back to the private sector, ran a very small company for about 7 years. And then I got elected in 2016 to Congress. And basically my life has come full circle because now I have a chance to really work on that mission statement that was assigned to me by my parents, which is make sure this country is there for the next families who need it. And during this pandemic, that particular mission statement has become a sacred calling. And so that has really guided me throughout this pandemic and this current crisis.
I want to talk now about the impact, what you think the impact is really, of the ascent of Indian American politicians on the relations between the two countries, India and America.
Well, I think that it's been very positive. Even before Indian Americans ascended into Congress in the numbers that we have right now, I think that the relationship has strengthened over time through successive Republican and Democratic presidential administrations. And I think that right now the relationship is broad and deep, and it, spans commercial, security ties, but also cultural and people-to-people ties. But what I always say is that the Indian American population is almost the glue or the bridge that draws the two nations closer together. And so as Indian Americans and as members of the US government, we help to cement those ties even more. Although obviously I look out for my constituents first and foremost, I can also sometimes understand the perspective that other folks might bring to the table, including from India, and see how there might be opportunities to work together and make this relationship even stronger and taking it to even higher heights.
I know you like to joke about being a part of or I guess a founding member of the Samosa Caucus. So tell our friends a little bit about that.
Well, now we have 4 Indian Americans in Congress, and we lay claim to Kamala Harris, who left us to become vice president. But I like to affectionately call us the Samosa Caucus. And quite frankly, we need more samosas over time, but we really need more pakoras, idlis, vades, everything you can think of, because we need to remember that old adage, Sanjeev. If you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. And neither we in the Indian American community nor any community can afford to be on the menu. It must pull up its proverbial seat to the table and speak its mind, bring its concerns, also lend its strengths to the solution of problems that affect all communities. And I think Indian Americans are very well placed for that, for various reasons, which I can go into. But above all, Indian Americans have tremendous talents and a civic spirit that can be brought to bear on very challenging problems. And I can't wait to see the solutions.
In addition to the flag bearers like yourself, who are sort of leading the march, leading the charge, the most famous names, what would you have to say for the more grassroots involvement of the Indian American community in our political landscape?
I think it's terrific. I think it's only a sample of what's to come, because you see this spirit at all ages, but you especially see it at the ages of those folks who are in school or coming out of college, the millennials, and I love that they are embracing the idea of public service as they are, because whether it is working on a campaign, whether it is working as an appointed official at any level of government, or whether it's volunteering, I think that giving of yourself for a bigger cause, a cause bigger than yourself, is kind of one of those ultimate um, goals that we would like members of the community to achieve. And so I'm really excited about what's to come, Sanjeev.
Should there be any kind of agenda for the Indian American community in terms of their engagement in American politics?
I think that's a great question. I think that different groups will kind of gather together, based on their geography, based on their interests with regard to public policy, perhaps even based on their interest with regard to the relationship with India. But what I do think is really important that we should always fight for in this country, just as I submit that Jewish Americans and others have fought for, is two things at least. One, making sure that everyone has a shot at getting onto the up escalator of the economy, regardless of whether you are poor and you're working hard and want to get into the middle class, or regardless of whether you're in the middle class or a small business and you aspire to become even more successful. We should always be pushing for upward mobility, economic mobility. The second, which is equally important, is that we push for everybody to have a chance to get onto that up escalator, regardless of where you come from, regardless of the color of your skin, regardless of what language you speak at home, regardless of the number of letters in your name. There are 29 in mine, Sanjeev, at last count. And so it's, as a member of a religious, ethnic, cultural, and racial minority, and who happens to be an immigrant, I am especially sensitive to any form of oppression, persecution, bigotry, intolerance, or prejudice directed at anybody in American society. And I respectfully submit that all of us have to band together to fight that type of discrimination, because that's the only way that we will prevent it from harming anyone, including us.
You're right. There is this old saying by the German philosopher Martin Niemöller, where it says that when they came for me, there was no one left to protect me. That's how it ends.
That's right. That's a good point. And, I think that it's sometimes easy for Indian Americans who are in a rather good position right now. Your audience might know this already, but Indian Americans are the fastest growing ethnic minority in the country, even faster growing than Latinx people, by the way. But we are also the most prosperous and the best educated ethnic minority in the country. That's a trifecta, which is rare in American society. And so with that incredible privilege comes incredible responsibility.
One last thing I do want to talk about, as in the last 2 or 3 minutes that we've got, and this might be a sort of a fun human interest story for our audience. I know that you have a good relationship with former President Barack Obama. In fact, when Mr. Obama ran for his House race, I believe in the year 2000, there's a picture of him eating dinner with the Krishnamoorthi family. Tell us a little bit about your relationship with President Obama.
I was, the president's then issues director for his U.S. Senate campaign, and I did work on his House race. It didn't go so well. Then he told me that he was going to work he was going to run for the U.S. Senate. I said, sure. And he asked me to be his issues or policy director. And what happened was that summer of 2002, I believe, we were driving through Peoria, Illinois, which is where I grew up, and that's where my parents resided. And, he came over for dinner. And, I think that that's one of those photographs that you take not knowing what the future holds. It was a great conversation. And I remember, President Barack Obama loves Indian food. He absolutely loves Indian food. And I think he had a roommate in college with whom he made a lot of Indian food as well. So I think
then became the ambassador to Belize, I believe.
Yeah.
Vinay Tumalapalli is, I think.
Yeah. And so it was a really amazing evening. And of course, it's one of those moments that you don't forget.
And it is now my tremendous honor to welcome Lord Popat of Harrow from the UK House of Lords. Lord Popat is someone we've interacted with in the past, and he's one of the leading Indo-Britishers in the UK political space. So, I think the most obvious place to start, I think a lot of people in India and, the Indian diaspora outside India are well aware of this. But in Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government, in the cabinet, there are already 3 people of Indian origin. And they're quite prominent, quite visible in the UK political landscape. And I guess the question I have for you is, how long do you think, Lord Popat, it will be, in your opinion, in your estimation, before we see an Indian origin prime minister in the UK?
I guess it won't be long. In fact, unfortunately, it's taken us a long time to be engaged in politics and civic duties, the British Indian community in particular. And in the past, they mainly voted for the Labour Party. Now they vote for the Conservative Party because our values are very similar. The British Indian values are similar to the Conservative Party. And you're quite right, we had 4 cabinet ministers, now we have 3, because Alok Sharma has moved on to the climate change, chairing that particular gathering we have in October. I would say, if you ask public people here, right across the UK, who would be the best who will make the best prime minister if Boris Johnson is to step down or something, and the opinion poll says Rishi Sunak. So you never know, it could be anything between 3 years to 10 years, but it won't be long. And the good news is that the British Indians are now coming forward to take part in politics. They were very shy of it in the past, never came forward. And the Conservative Party are now more engaging with us than ever before. And that's making a big difference as well.
You talked about the historical movement, or I guess the historical affiliation with the Labour Party, and now moving a little bit more towards the Tories. Just for our viewers, could you help us understand what the patterns of the Indo-British community voting has been in terms of Labour versus Tory versus Lib Dem?
Historically, the British Indians have always voted the Labour Party for many reasons. It's the Labour Party that introduced our National Health Service. Secondly, it's the Labour Party who gave independence to India. And thirdly, it's a party that caters for ethnic minority. But the Labour Party policies or values are different from our own values. We believe in hard work, we believe in education, we believe in enterprise, family, faith, and this is where the Conservative Party fits in. But the Conservative Party in the past were a racist party in many ways. And I'm glad David Cameron sort of changed that round. They reformed the party to welcome the people of ethnic minority, what we call the BAME community. I mean, if you look at the figures in terms of election, in 2005, 11% voted for the Conservative Party. In 2010, then, 5 years later, that number went up to 24%. And then 2015, that number was 49%. So we, as a Conservative Party, were able to win about 14, 15 seats from the Labour, where there was a real concentration, including Harrow, by the way. So the real constituent of British Indians. And therefore, that Conservative Party has become more attractive now for British Indians. Remember, it's Tony Blair as well, when he was a Prime Minister for the Labour Party, he welcomed large number of immigrants, including India. So they're all thankful to the Labour Party that is that party that gave them a warm welcome. Hence, they used to support Labour Party. But now they realize, ideally, the party that's good for the country, that's good for our community, and that's good for our families, more tend to be Conservatives.
If you were to convey to Prime Minister Johnson that there are certain messages or themes from the Indo-British community to be relayed to Prime Minister Modi, what would those themes be? What would that message be?
Well, you're right. In fact, we had to cancel one trip of Prime Minister Johnson going to India for the Republic Day because of the COVID situation here in UK. Now is planned to go on the 26th of April for 3 days, which is quite long for any Prime Minister to visit another Prime Minister for 3 days. And we want to see post-Brexit, we are more outward-looking country, we are more global. India is a very important partner historically for many, many years, for nearly 300 years. And we're looking to do more trade and investment. But what we have done since we left Imperial Brussels is we have signed agreements with Canada, Australia, and many other countries, many other Commonwealth countries. And we're looking forward to sign a trade agreement with India to increase our trade with that country. Currently, our trade stands about £24 billion a year, which is not as big for the size of Indian population, for 1.2 billion customers. But good news is India is the second largest investor in the United Kingdom. And the British Indian investment are, in fact, supporting over 500,000 jobs in each other's country, which is, in each other's economies. So which is making a huge difference. And Rishi, in fact, our Chancellor, met the Finance Minister, Nirmala Sitharaman, last year in a landmark virtual 10th Economic and Financial Dialogue. And we were looking forward to develop that further and see how we can achieve this trade deal to make trade easier for each other's country. So this bilateral trade is key for both countries, for India to create jobs. And Modi, in fact, Prime Minister Modi is a different Prime Minister than we had for India in the past. He's come up with a good model, a new model for development of India. In fact, Modi has pulled India together as a country, and made in India. He's emphasizing that, and we're happy to see that we UK companies, for example, in China with anti-Chinese sentiments, that we can, reallocate to India maybe. And India has got that to offer us in terms of skills and large middle-class people. So, and of course, the English language and Commonwealth, all this, the commonality we have with India is a lot more, I would say, believe me, than any other country in the world.
What does the advancement of Indo-Britishers in the UK political landscape hold? What does it herald for UK-India ties? Do you perceive, for example, that the more Indian origin people that advance in UK politics, the easier it becomes and the greater the imperatives are for closer UK-India ties?
Well, I think good news is in both countries, Sanjeev, we have new generation of British-born Indians here, a new generation of Indians born in India, upcoming middle class, highly educated, want to, they got this aspiration to do better. So all that is making it, attractive for both countries. And, we British Indians in many ways are a living bridge between us and India in many ways, and quite often there's also a living bridge between India and UK because large number of Indians, entrepreneurs and politicians in India were actually educated in the UK, like the lady who was at Westminster University. So you can imagine the commonality we have, apart from English language and rule of law and democracy, but that personal touch we have, that makes a huge difference. And I'm sure by having this British Indians in our cabinet, in our parliament, working with India becomes much more easier for both countries.
Absolutely. And just for the sake of our audience, Lord Popat was referring to one of the staff members at the Observer Research Foundation who was a scholar at the University of Westminster, which is in the same area that Lord Popat represents in the House of Lords.
Correct. Yeah.
You know, as we begin to kind of wind down this conversation, Lord Popat, I do want to ask you a question that pertains not only to Indo-Britishers, but also is sort of an economic policy question, because I know that you have significant experience and expertise in the policy aspects pertaining to small and mid-sized business enterprises. And really, specifically, my question is, as you know better than I do, the Indo-British community tends to be quite entrepreneurial. Now, especially in light of Brexit, what do you expect the future to hold for small and mid-sized entrepreneurs in the Indo-British community?
Well, post-Brexit, post-COVID-19, the new United Kingdom, which is what I call now, must now behave like a business. And the time has come to unlock our red tapes and rule book and to reset UK's economy. We were obviously ruled in many ways. Our legislation came effectively from Brussels. Now we want to make sure we make those legislation here for the good of UK. And, you know, Prime Minister and Rishi always says global Britain is, well, global Britain is a fine idea, Rishi and Prime Minister, but it should not be just a slogan. It requires innovation in science and technology, but also re-engagement with countries like India. And that's crucial. And, and other emerging markets, including continent of Africa, which is coming up so fast. So India is on the move with under Modi's leadership, and we need to see that we can do a lot more. India should not take for granted that UK corporates will reallocate from China to India. India must have the right infrastructure, make it easier. Ease of doing business in India is not that good compared to countries like Rwanda or Mauritius. They have to improve on that. One of the biggest problems we find, Sanjeev, frankly, is we are the largest center in the world for financial services. And India must abolish the Foreign Exchange Management Act to enable Indian companies to borrow money from UK. And the cost of borrowing here is about 2-3% compared to India is about 9-10%. So that will bring in more capital to India. They can raise the funds from UK at much lower rate. And it needs to carry out a number of reforms for us and for them to make it easier. We need to carry out reforms as well. It's a challenge to them, a challenge to us. And we need to find a way of doing that as quickly as possible.
Let's conclude on a fun note, if you would, Lord Popat. As you probably know, the Indian cricket team will be visiting England for a 5-test match series in the autumn. And you're well aware that things like Bollywood and cricket are sort of the uniting glue in India and between India and various countries like England. So I have a simple question for you: who's going to win, India or England?
That 10 years ago, if you took a survey, I would say about 70% Indians, 80% would support India. If you take the same survey now, with a new generation, remember, 60% of Indians living here are born here. Mm. And I would say 95% of those have not seen India. They know their parents come from India or their grandparents come from India. And the new generation of British Indians tend to support England. I would say the survey that took place last time was about 60%. So of course, I would like my country to win, which is of course the United Kingdom.